The Smile have recently released their album Cutouts, their third album in total, and the second album of just this year. In the absence of Radiohead, it's really cool to see these guys producing so much music. The opening track, Foreign Spies, released earlier as a double single with Zero Sum, caught my attention because as well as being a beautiful song, it features some cool musical devices that ties in with some of the music theory that we've been covering on the channel. So we're going to look at the song both from a rhythmical perspective and a harmonic perspective. So the first thing to note is that Foreign Spies is an entirely electronic piece of music. Every part on this track, except obviously Tom York's vocals, is played by a synthesizer. There don't seem to be any other instruments or even drums. Also, every single synth on this track is monophonic, which means that they always play one note at a time. So although we'll be talking a lot about chords in the video, keep in mind that none of these chords are ever played by one single synthesizer, but rather they're the result of a combination of all the different monophonic parts that the synths are playing, as well as Tom York's vocal melodies. With that out the way, let's look at the intro and the verse of the track. This very slow chord progression is actually based on a movement titled K16 from Johnny Greenwood's 2019 orchestral piece Horror Vacui. The progression starts in B major and then largely just goes through the diatonic chords in B major, with each successive chord's root note a fifth below the previous one. Diatonic chords are the chords that can be built by only using the notes that naturally occur in the scale that we're in. That's why here, as you can see, we have a mixture of major, minor, and even diminished chords. This is an extremely standard progression, and if we were to fill in the last two chords, it would continue with the 5 and end on the 1 again. Which is exactly what happens in the original orchestral piece. But in Foreign Spies, instead of the 5, we get an A major, which adds a spice of intrigue. Now, in the key of B major, there's no A natural. We ordinarily have an A sharp. So this A natural is a flat 7th, which makes this A major chord a flat 7 chord. So what's the purpose of using this chord here? Let's quickly take a look at the different modes of the B scale. B major, or Ionian, is just one flattened 7th away from being a B Mixolydian scale, which just so happens to be that A natural that we've been talking about. So what's happening here is that we're just adding some Mixolydian flavor to our progression. This is what we call modal mixture, a fancy way of saying that we're borrowing chords from parallel keys, or parallel modes in this case. This technique of using the flat 7th chord from Mixolydian is actually pretty common in rock, blues, and pop. Now, in terms of rhythm, these synths are playing very slowly and steadily at a tempo of around 53 BPM. But you might have noticed that the bass notes always occur on the upbeats before the main synths play. This probably makes it more convenient for us to count double time at 105 BPM in 4/4. And as we'll see later, there are various parts of the song that point towards this much faster tempo, and also an interesting underlying groove. Now, in terms of how the progression repeats, we get 6 beats on one chord, followed by 4 beats on the next lower chord. This pattern repeats until we reach the lower tonic B again, where we hang for 12 beats. Actually, the last of these 2 beats imply another passing A major chord, but more on that shortly. This unbalanced distribution of chords, as well as the decision to hang on the final B chord for 3 whole bars, contribute to a sense of instability and rhythmic ambiguity to the track. Furthermore, the length of the entire pattern, as you might have noticed, is 12 bars. In a conventional 4/4 track, you'd probably expect a 16-bar loop, so this shortened pattern makes the pacing of the song even more fluid and unpredictable. So that's the bulk of the first section. Except we have to talk about the transition to the chorus. As we mentioned previously, the verse ends in B major, with a short passing A major chord that plays for the final 2 beats of the verse pattern. And then the chorus comes in D major. Earlier, we said that the A major is a flat 7 chord that implies mixolydian. But in this case, the A major could also imply the parallel minor of B major, which is B minor. And what's even better is that this A major is also the 5 chord of the relative major of B minor, which is D major. So once again, what's happening here is that we're using this A major chord to establish that we're borrowing from our key's parallel minor, in this case B minor, and simultaneously we're setting up a route to go to the relative major key of this B minor, which is D major. Or in other words, to transition to a major key that uses the same notes as the B minor key. So now the song has modulated to D major, but it doesn't stay there. The chord progression in the chorus follows a similar strategy to the verse, going down in fifths, except unlike the verse chords, which were all based on chords in the B major key, these are all major chords, so it really gives off this unsteady, constantly swirling and shifting feeling, as if the earth beneath your feet is moving. And interestingly, if we look at the circle of fifths, we can see this exact pattern of chords, starting from D major and going anti-clockwise around. So in effect, it's modulating every chord, trying to find a place to settle. I think it's a really nice companion to the foreign Spies lyric that repeats in the chorus, conjuring up an enigmatic, ambiguous vibe that constantly changes its sense of home. So after going all the way around to E flat major, we end up with our old friend A major, which sounds a bit startling after the E flat major chord, given that none of the notes of the A major chord are in the key of E flat major. But also the A major is once again quite interesting here because it could be the 5 of D major, which is obviously where we started, and we could also go back to. If that were the case, the E flat major just before the A major would be the flat 2 chord in the key of D, which is also known as a Neapolitan chord. Broadly speaking, the Neapolitan chord can be used as an interesting replacement of a subdominant or 4 chord. So in this example, we're effectively creating a very standard 4-5-1 cadence in D major, where we're replacing the 4 chord with our E flat major Neapolitan chord. However, we also know from before that the A major was used previously in the piece to go back to the B major at the end of the verse progression. So once again, they're creating ambiguity as to where the true tonal center of the piece is. As it happens, at the end of this first chorus, we go back to the verse progression in B major. Now let's take a look at the rhythm. The chorus moves away from the odd patterns in the verse, and instead, each chord is played for 6 beats, making the total length of the chorus 12 bars again. But pay attention to these little flourishes in between the chords. If you remember, we mentioned earlier the fast underlying groove of the song, and up until now we kind of stuck to the metronome and just assumed that the whole track had a very straight feel. But this part is hinting at it not being so straight after all. If we try to follow this part by playing 8th notes, we realize that the even hits feel like they're happening later than what we'd expect from a straight feel, closer to where a 16th note triplet would be. So instead of this, we play this. This is what we call swing. Now, we can also go back to the verses and notice that the melodies at the endings of York's phrases are not randomly drawn out rhythmically. bass in the verse that precedes the 1 seems to follow this pattern. So the second verse is largely the same, except for the addition of an arpeggiated synth in sync with the other synth hits, to add some movement to the second verse. The interesting part here comes once again in the transition to the second chorus. You remember what happened last time? After hanging out on the B major chord as the final chord of the verse progression, we used the A major passing chord as the 5 of D major to modulate there. This time though, it's handled a little differently, and we get an E flat 7 in place of the B major chord. So what's the deal here? Well, the E flat 7 would be a flat 2-7 chord in the key of D major. This is sometimes used in place of the 5-7 chord to lead back to the tonic in what's called a tritone substitution. So in D major, instead of playing an A7 to lead back to the D major chord, we replaced it with a chord a tritone away, which is the E flat 7. However, as we said, in this case, we're not actually replacing the A, we're replacing the B major, which comes after the A chord. So in effect, we're playing two chords that function as the 5 of D major, one after another. This is probably partly to fully fill out the number of bars in our progression, because the A comes a little too early in the progression to be replaced, but also partly because they want to prolong the tension and the desire for resolution. In the song, the chord coincides with the line "backs are turned," and once again is a beautiful bit of word painting, completing the full line, "and they're grabbing kitchen knives every time our backs are turned," and injecting an extra dose of nastiness into the harmony. Being only one semitone away from the D major chord that starts the chorus, it ends up smoothly sliding back into the same progression from the first chorus. Although the second chorus is the same from a harmonic perspective, rhythmically something pretty cool happens. We get a high icy synth at the top which starts playing triplets. It immediately gives the section a bouncier, faster feel and contrasts with the other straight playing synths, especially the other 8th note arpeggiated synth it's playing against. It ends up emphasizing the offbeats with the nature of the melody that it plays, and makes the listener feel uneasy and unsure which groove to feel. So in effect, the underlying groove that we mentioned earlier is trying to balance between and bridge these two extremes. The slow halftime feel of the main synths and the triplet feel of this new icy synth. Now, for the first time in the track, the grouping of progressions into 12 bars is broken, and during the second repetition of the second chorus, after 9 bars, we transition into what you might call a bridge. This bridge follows the B flat major to E flat major part of the chorus, and it stays oscillating between these two chords for another 9 bars, joined by a cutting synth melody on top. For the final 3 bars of the section, the progression continues into the usual resolution of every chorus, which is the A major chord. The chords finally resolve, and we appear to be heading back into another verse, with Tom's vocal singing "It's a Beautiful World" in a slight divergence from the line "In a Beautiful World" that starts both verses of the song. However, we quickly find out that this is a new section entirely, with no vocals, and instead, quite a chaotic mix of parts. Harmonically, it's similar to the bridge in that it's oscillating between 2 chords again, but this time it's between the 1 and the 4 chords of the verse, B major and E major, which makes it feel very stable, positive and final. Rhythmically, it returns to the groupings of 6 and 4 beats similar to the verses, but now the chords are held for longer and only change at the 7th and the 17th beat. So now the whole pattern repeats much faster, every 5 bars. The most chaotic part, however, is the harmonically rich high synth. This seems to be playing its melody on a loop that's an 8th note triplet shorter than the main loop. So over time, its notes repeat sooner and sooner than expected, emphasizing offbeats to disorient the listener and throw off their sense of groove, especially in contrast to the very straight and rigid arpeggiator underneath. Just when we thought that everything would subside and resolve neatly, they find another way to make us feel uneasy. So all the snippets of the song you heard in this video were actually recreated by us. And we have a video explaining exactly how we recreated and mixed the entirety of Foreign Spies just using stock Ableton synths and plugins. So go check that out, and I'll see you next time on Mixed Signals. Bye bye.